Thanksgiving has always been a weird affair in my family. Not warm, not cozy, more like a networking event for people who happen to be related. I'm Caleb, 32 years old, no spouse, no kids, no mortgage, and apparently that makes me the odd one out. Every year, I drive an hour and a half to my Uncle Ron's house in a cul-de-sac suburb that smells like freshly sprayed lawns and generational wealth. And every year, I sit at a table full of people who act like I'm a quirky side character in the family movie of their lives. My parents always wanted a picture-perfect family dynamic, so they smoothed over every conflict with tight smiles and maybe just let it go glances. That left people like Uncle Ron with way too much room to say whatever he wanted. And believe me, he did. He's the kind of guy who brags about refinancing his house at the perfect time like it's a stock tip. Self-made man. If you ignore the part where my grandparents helped him buy his first property and paid for his MBA. Still, he considers himself the financial guru of the family, and his favorite pastime is unsolicited advice, especially about money. I'd been renting a duplex in a quiet part of the city, and I liked it. No mortgage, no HOA fees, no yard maintenance. I worked in digital marketing for a mid-sized company, saved aggressively, invested smart, and had no debt. I didn't talk about it much because, frankly, I knew it wouldn't matter to people like Ron. They equated adulthood with owning a lawnmower. So, there we were, Thanksgiving. Ron had made his usual dry turkey, and his wife Beth had gone all out with a Pinterest-perfect tablescape. Little name cards, harvest-themed napkins, a ceramic turkey centerpiece that probably had a name. I took my usual seat toward the end of the table, near the cousins' kids. I didn't mind. It meant I got first dibs on dessert when the kids wandered off early. Dinner had just hit that lull, post-serving, pre-pie, when conversations started branching out. That's when it happened. So, Caleb, Uncle Ron boomed from across the table, swirling his wine like a smug wizard. Still throwing money away renting that place of yours? The table chuckled, not because it was funny, but because that's what they always did when Ron spoke like that. Nervous, automatic laughter. Like a social survival reflex. I could feel my shoulders tighten, but I smiled. Polite. Dismissive. I gave a soft shrug. It works for me. But that wasn't enough. It never was. I mean, you're 32. He continued, slicing into his turkey with a flourish like he was carving truth itself into the meat. You gotta build equity sometime. Otherwise, you're just lining someone else's pockets, you know. I nodded slowly, trying to decide whether to let it slide or clap back. But then I saw the way my cousin Marissa, Ron's daughter, looked at me, almost apologetic. She worked in accounting. She knew better, but she wasn't going to say anything. Nobody ever did. That's when I realized, screw it. This wasn't advice. It was theater, and he needed an audience. But this time, I wouldn't let him be the only one holding the mic. So I tilted my head, keeping my voice calm. Ron, out of curiosity, how much are you paying your landlord each month? He blinked. Landlord? Yeah, I said, setting down my fork. The bank. You still have that mortgage on this place, right? The room went still. Not silent, just quieter. My mom gave me that look she gives when I bring up politics. But I kept going. I mean, if you've been paying for, 15 years now? Must be almost done, right? Or did you refinance again? He looked stunned. Not angry. Not yet. Just stunned, like someone had spoken Latin at the dinner table. Well, we refinanced last year, actually. Got a great rate. Right? So you reset the clock. How much interest are you paying on that loan now, over 30 years? Have you ever added it up? How much of this house do you actually own? There it was. The silence. Beth's hand hovered over the gravy dish like she'd forgotten what it was. My dad cleared his throat, twice. My cousin Dan looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Ron's face turned a shade darker. He opened his mouth, closed it, then forced a laugh. Come on, it's not the same. At least I'll have something to show for it at the end. Maybe, I said with a shrug. Assuming the housing market keeps climbing. And the foundation holds. And the roof doesn't need replacing again. But sure, equity. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't cursed. But you'd think I flipped the table from the way people reacted. Aunt Beth finally muttered. All right, let's not get into this right now. Someone coughed. Someone else pretended to check on the pie. But Ron just sat there, fork frozen midair, face a slow-burning red, and suddenly a lot less smug. I didn't say another word for the rest of dinner. Just smiled politely, thanked Beth for the food, and made sure to compliment the cranberry sauce. But I could feel it. Something had shifted. Not just between me and Ron. Between me and the whole table. They weren't used to me speaking up. They weren't used to me knowing things. And suddenly, I wasn't just the quirky, unmarried renter anymore. I went home that night with a strange mixture of adrenaline and guilt bubbling in my chest. I hadn't planned to call him out like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized. Maybe it was time I stopped letting people talk down to me just because I'd chosen a different path. What I didn't know then was that Ron wasn't going to let it go. And the next time I saw him, he was ready to make things personal. I thought maybe Thanksgiving would be it. One awkward dinner, one moment of Ron getting humbled a bit, and then back to normal, or at least our version of normal. But I should have known better. If there's one thing people like Uncle Ron can't stand, it's being embarrassed, especially in front of their audience. He wasn't going to just let that moment fade. No, he was going to reclaim the spotlight. And if that meant turning me into the family punchline again, so be it. It started subtly at first. Little jabs slipped into the family group chat. He sent a link to an article titled, "Why Millennials Regret Renting in Their 30s, with a laughing emoji. No context. Just dropped it in the middle of a conversation about Beth's new kitchen backsplash. A few days later, he posted a meme that said, "Rent is just a donation to your landlord's mortgage," and tagged me. He'd never tagged me before. Ever. I ignored it. I really did try. My instinct was to play it cool, not give him the reaction he was clearly fishing for. But then he started getting bolder. The next family Zoom call, for my mom's birthday, he brought it up again, unprovoked. "So Caleb, you still renting that shoebox downtown?" he said, smirking while sipping from a coffee mug that said #OneDad. Even though his kids all visibly cringed every time he spoke. I gave him a short nod. Yup, still happy. That's wild, man. I just can't wrap my head around paying someone else's mortgage like that. I guess you just don't like stability, huh? Before I could respond, my mom jumped in with a laugh that was just a little too forced. "Okay, let's not start the housing debate again." "Just saying," Ron added, holding his hands up, "some of us believe in building a future." I almost signed off right then. But it was my mom's birthday, and I didn't want to be that guy. So I gritted my teeth and sat through the rest of the call, staring at his smug face in a little Zoom square while pretending everything was fine. I figured it would die down after that. I underestimated how deeply Ron needed to win. He started roping other relatives into it. At my cousin Dan's engagement party, hosted at yet another family home I was reminded I didn't own, he cornered me by the bar with a conspiratorial grin. "You know," he said, swirling his drink. "Beth and I were talking. If you ever wanted advice on home buying, we could help you get started. It's not too late to catch up." I blinked. "Catch up?" "Yeah," he said, slapping my shoulder like he was doing me a favor. "I mean, you're a smart guy. You've got a good job. You just need a little direction." Direction. Like I'd been wandering aimlessly through life. Like I didn't have a plan. Like every choice I'd made was a mistake I needed saving from. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm actually in a really good place right now." He laughed. Sure. I mean, you've got flexibility. That's worth something, I guess." That, I guess, stuck with me the rest of the night. Things escalated from there. Every family function became a minefield. He'd bring up housing costs, throw around his property value like it was a trophy. He even once pulled up Zillow at a barbecue just to show me how much equity he'd gained since his last appraisal. Like I cared. Like that was the measure of a man. Then came the 4th of July cookout. That day, that's when things shifted from petty to cruel. It was hot, even for July. The kind of day where the air sticks to your skin and your clothes feel like they're clinging just to spite you. My parents were hosting, which meant everyone was packed into their modest backyard with paper plates and sweat-soaked shirts. I brought a few six-packs and a homemade potato salad. I even helped set up the folding chairs. Ron showed up late, as usual, wearing his aviator sunglasses like he was still 25 and pulling up in his leased SUV like it was a Rolls-Royce. Beth followed behind, arms full of some casserole that none of us asked for. He made his rounds, shaking hands like a politician, complimenting my dad on the lawn, tossing the football with the teenagers. Then he saw me. "Caleb," he boomed, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Glad you could make it. I was worried you'd be stuck at your landlord's mercy for the holiday." A few people chuckled. Nervously again. I gave a tight smile. "Yeah, well, luckily he let me off the leash for the day." He laughed like I was playing along, but I wasn't. And he knew it. Later, as the burgers were grilling and the sun started dipping below the fence line, he called everyone over for a toast. He stood near the grill, drink in hand, sunglasses still on even though it was getting dark. "I just want to say," he began, "how proud I am of this family. Everyone here is doing so well. Dan's getting married. Marissa just got promoted. And of course, Beth and I are celebrating paying off another investment property next month." There was polite applause, clinks of glasses. I stayed quiet. "And then there's Caleb," he continued, turning toward me with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, marching to the beat of his own drum, teaching us all that you don't need equity to feel fulfilled, just a good landlord and a Wi-Fi password. The laughter this time was louder. Some people actually clapped. I stood there, staring at him, heart pounding in my chest. My hands were shaking, but I kept them at my sides. "I guess we all have our own version of the American dream," he added with a wink. "And Caleb's is just month to month." That was the moment. The moment it shifted from annoying to humiliating. I looked at my dad, silent. My mom, looking at her feet. My cousins, avoiding eye contact. Nobody said a word. Nobody stood up. Not one person defended me. Not even a half-hearted, "Hey, come on, man." I was completely alone in a yard full of people who shared my DNA. I left without saying goodbye. Got in my car and drove for over an hour, aimlessly, just to clear my head. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat in silence, feeling this cold weight settle in my chest. That was the night I realized this wasn't just Ron being Ron. This was allowed. Encouraged, even. The rest of the family, they liked having a target. It made them feel safer, more normal. If I was the one always being teased, always the black sheep, then their lives didn't have to be examined too closely. I went home and sat on my balcony, the city lights stretching out before me, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. I kept my head down for years. Tried to be the peacemaker, the quiet one, the one who didn't make waves. But not anymore. I had resources. I had patience. And most importantly, I had time. Ron wanted a game. He had no idea who he was playing with. After that 4th of July cookout, I pulled back. Completely. No texts, no group chat replies, no RSVPs. My phone buzzed a few times the week after, just checking in from Mom. "Are you okay?" from Marissa, and one from my dad that just said, "Call your mother." But I didn't. Not for a while. I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. Years of these little digs had added up, and what happened in that backyard wasn't just a joke gone too far. It was the culmination of every unspoken insult and every shrug of, "That's just how Ron is." I wasn't sure what cutting contact would do. I didn't expect an apology, and I definitely didn't expect them to take my side. But I needed space to breathe. Time to reassess. That week was strange. Lonely, mostly. My apartment had always been a sanctuary, but now it felt like a holding cell. Quiet. Still. I'd stare at the walls and think about every single thing I could have said to Ron. Every line I didn't fire back. I hated that I let him get to me. I hated that I left. I hated that not a single person stood up for me. And then, I hated that I let them define my worth. That was the shift. It wasn't about the house. It was about how I saw myself. Because for so long, I'd let their definition of success bleed into my own thinking. Maybe I was behind. Maybe I should be doing more, owning more, proving more. But the more I sat with that thought, the more I realized I wasn't unhappy. I liked my job. I liked my city. I liked the fact that I could pack up and move if I wanted. I didn't owe 30 years to a bank. I didn't have to negotiate with an HOA board over what shade of gray was acceptable for a fence. And yet, I still felt less. So I decided to stop letting them measure me by their ruler. The rebuilding started small. First, I went to therapy, something I'd been meaning to do for years. Found a guy named Brian. Middle-aged, laid-back, used metaphors about cars and old video games. It helped. Not just because of Ron, but because I needed to process more than just one uncle's ego. I needed to unpack years of trying to be low-maintenance Caleb, just to keep the peace. Next, I changed my approach to money. Not because of anything Ron said, but because I realized I did have financial goals. I just hadn't named them. So I made a list. Emergency fund. Topped it off to 6 months. Investments. Automated monthly contributions. Shifted to a more aggressive portfolio. Real estate. Maybe, but on my terms. I didn't want to buy just to prove a point. But I also didn't want to avoid it out of spite. So I started researching. Quietly. Not obsessively, just thoughtfully. I even toured a few properties. A duplex in the north side. A condo near the river. Nothing clicked, not yet. But I liked having the option. It felt like reclaiming something that had been used to mock me. Meanwhile, I leaned into work. I pitched a new strategy for a client campaign that ended up increasing their conversions by 28%, which, in our world, is gold. My manager took notice. 3 weeks later, I got offered a senior position, better title, better pay, and the freedom to lead my own team. I accepted it with a calm nod and an internal scream. Funny thing was, I didn't even think about telling my family at first. It wasn't about them anymore. But the real turning point came unexpectedly, through a friend of a friend. I was out at a brewery with some coworkers when I met Jules. She was a UX designer. Witty, sharp, didn't blink when I told her I rented. In fact, she said, good. Less stress. We started texting, then dating. Casual at first, but steady. She didn't care about my family drama. She liked my terrible movie impressions and the fact that I made her tea without asking. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen for something other than what I didn't have. She encouraged me to start a side project I'd been dragging my feet on for years, a content platform for independent creatives. A mix of marketing resources, design templates, and case studies. Nothing revolutionary, but useful. I built it in evenings, weekends. Slowly. No launch party, no grand announcement. Just steady uploads, honest value. Within 2 months, it had 2,000 subscribers. By month 4, sponsors were reaching out. And I realized maybe I was building something. Not a white picket fence. Not a 4-bedroom ranch. But something that was mine. Still, I won't lie. Every time a family event came around, the texts trickled in. Mom sent photos. Missed you at Easter. My cousin Sam tried calling once, but I let it go to voicemail. Ron never reached out directly, but he didn't need to. He lived rent-free in their narratives. Whenever they said, you should come around more, what they really meant was, just let it go, so we can pretend it didn't happen. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to be ready, not for confrontation, but for clarity. I didn't want to walk back into that world until I knew I wouldn't shrink inside it. One day, about 9 months after that cookout, I got a text from my mom. Thanksgiving is at our place this year. Would mean a lot if you came. No pressure. Just think about it. Love you. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't spoken to Ron since that night. I'd skipped 2 birthdays, a baby shower, and a Labor Day pool party. Part of me wanted to delete the message. Another part wanted to show up just to prove a point. But a small, quiet voice inside me said, you're ready. Not for revenge. Not for drama. But for closure. So I typed back. I'll be there. No smiley face. No conditions. Just a decision. The days leading up to Thanksgiving felt surreal. Like I was walking into a test I'd been preparing for all year. Jules offered to come with me, but I told her I needed to do this alone. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. I just felt clear. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I noticed Ron's SUV already parked out front. Of course he was early. Of course he'd brought the same smug attitude and holiday bottle of wine he always did. But this time, I wasn't stepping into their world unarmed. I walked in with my shoulders straight, greeted everyone with warmth, but not weakness. Hugs, handshakes, the usual, you look good, Caleb, and long time no see. Ron saw me from across the room, mid-laugh with a cousin. His face didn't register surprise, just calculation. He made his way over with that same showman grin. Caleb, he said, arms wide, like we were long-lost pals. Glad you could join us, man. I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. You still living in that little place downtown? I tilted my head. Still renting, yeah? Makes more financial sense for my goals right now. He raised an eyebrow. Well, if you ever want to talk about how to build real assets. I didn't let him finish. I leaned in, casual, calm. Funny you mention that. I'm launching my second income stream this month. First one paid off my student loans and gave me enough runway to maybe buy 2 houses. But I'm waiting for the right one. Not in a rush. I like to build smart, not fast. The smile on his face wavered. Just slightly. And that's when I knew. I didn't need to humiliate him. I didn't need to win a shouting match. Because I already had something he didn't. Peace. But I also knew. He wasn't done. Because people like Ron, they can't stand not having the last word. And I could already see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He had something planned. And this time, it wasn't just a comment. It was a setup. Thanksgiving that year was a masterclass in fake smiles and cautious glances. Everyone was a little too polite, a little too upbeat. Even the food had an unnatural calm to it, like it knew not to stir the pot. The whole thing had the vibe of a ceasefire. And sitting across from Ron, I could feel it. He was waiting, watching, winding something up. I played it cool, laughed when appropriate, answered questions about work without boasting, talked about Jules briefly, nothing too personal, just enough to show I wasn't drifting aimlessly through life. But I never let my guard drop, because every time Ron looked at me, there was this tight-lipped smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth, like he was holding in a secret. Then, just as dessert was being passed around, he made his move. "You know," he said, cutting into a slice of pecan pie, "I've been thinking a lot about the next generation lately. All this talk about passive income, side hustles, freedom over stability. It's a nice fantasy, but at some point, you gotta plant roots, right?" A few heads turned. Not many, but enough. He looked directly at me. "I mean, eventually you'll want a legacy. Something to pass on. Renting doesn't leave much behind, does it?" It wasn't a question. It was a line from a script he'd been rehearsing. I didn't respond. Just sipped my coffee and let the silence thicken. And that's when he dropped it. "I actually brought something," he added, patting the leather folio on the chair beside him. "I've been working on a little guide for the family. Some basic principles of smart investing, home equity, market timing. Nothing complicated, just the stuff I've learned over the years." He pulled out a stack of glossy, stapled booklets. Seriously, he made pamphlets, labeled The Path to Real Wealth, a family primer. It had his name on the front. I scanned the table. My mom looked embarrassed. My dad looked like he wanted to disappear into his wine glass. A few cousins chuckled nervously. Ron handed a copy to each person, including me. I flipped it open. Charts. Quotes. A grainy photo of him standing in front of a sold sign. It was real estate cult energy wrapped in Times New Roman. And then, page 7. There it was. A section titled, "Why Renting is Financially Reckless, a Case Study." I skimmed it. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't have to be. It was about a mid-30s male professional with no mortgage, no equity, and a lifestyle centered around flexibility and minimal responsibility. It was a hit piece, disguised as advice. I closed the booklet and placed it neatly on the table in front of me. Then I smiled. Not a sarcastic smile, not a forced one, a real one, because that's when I knew something he didn't. He'd overplayed. This wasn't just a jab anymore. It was a coordinated move. He'd put time, money, and ego into producing something that was clearly about me, which meant if I responded, I wouldn't be starting drama. I'd be defending myself. And if there's one thing I'd learned in the last year, silence is not always maturity. Sometimes, silence is just permission. So I nodded, stood up calmly, and said, "Hey, Mom, is it okay if I say a few words?" She blinked. Sure, sweetheart." I turned to the table. I wasn't going to say anything today. I really wasn't. But since we're doing family presentations now, a few people laughed. Ron didn't. "I actually brought something too," I said. That part wasn't true, but I didn't need to bring it there. I had it ready to go. I pulled out my phone, opened the site I'd built for my content platform, and cast it to the living room TV, which was still on and visible from the dining room. Everyone turned to look. "This," I said, "is the business I started 9 months ago. It's a resource hub for independent creators, freelancers, and small business owners who want to grow without corporate gatekeepers." I clicked through the site, showed the analytics dashboard, traffic growth, subscriber base, ad revenue estimates, testimonials. First month, it made $30. Last month, $9,000. Passive income, diversified streams, all without a mortgage. The room was quiet. Then I went in for the real blow. And next year, I'm launching a podcast. Got a brand sponsor lined up already. Funny enough, they sell a product called Rent Safe, designed to help renters protect their rights and manage payments without landlord interference. I turned to Ron, still smiling. "Maybe I'll send you a copy of my guide when it's ready." He didn't say anything, just adjusted his shirt collar and gave a tight chuckle. "Impressive," he finally muttered. "But everyone's got their path." "Exactly," I said. "And mine doesn't involve writing hit pieces about family members under the guise of financial literacy." I sat down, took a bite of pie. Nobody clapped. Nobody had to. The silence was enough. But here's the thing. That moment, that wasn't the revenge. That was just the setup. Because as satisfying as it felt to reclaim the narrative, I knew Ron wouldn't let that be the end. He'd stew. He'd spin it. He'd call it disrespectful or immature. He'd try to twist it into another example of me being unstable, defensive, threatened by success. And that's when I realized I needed to be smarter. I needed to be strategic. Because Ron was playing a long game. And now? So was I? After Thanksgiving, I called Jules and told her everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't even flinch. She just said, "What's your next move?" I told her I didn't know yet. But that was a lie. I did know. Because over the last few months, something else had happened. Something I hadn't told anyone. One of my clients, a real estate firm based out of Denver, had hired me to overhaul their brand strategy and digital presence. In doing so, I'd learned a lot. About the housing market. About how real estate worked behind the scenes. About how certain investors operated. And I'd stumbled across a local portfolio of properties held under an LLC. An LLC that, after a little digging, turned out to be connected to Ron. It wasn't public knowledge. It wasn't illegal. But it wasn't exactly the pristine empire he liked to portray. Turns out, a few of his rental units were in disrepair. One had a code violation. Another had a lawsuit pending over a disputed lease. It was all available if you knew where to look. I hadn't done anything with the information yet. But I kept notes, screenshots, PDFs, dates, receipts. And slowly, carefully, I started putting together a picture of who Ron really was behind the monologue. It wasn't about exposure. It wasn't about shame. It was about leverage. Because if Ron wanted to keep treating family like a stage, and me like a prop, I needed to be ready for the moment he tried to take it too far. And believe me, that moment was coming. By the time the next family gathering rolled around, Easter, hosted at Ron's house again, I was ready. Not in the aggressive, gloves-off way Ron would expect, but in the patient, strategic way he'd never see coming. The last 6 months had been quiet on the surface. He hadn't contacted me, and I hadn't contacted him. But he'd gotten wind of my business through the family grapevine, and according to Marissa, he wasn't thrilled. She'd mentioned over brunch that he'd called my site a flash-in-the-pan internet hustle and muttered something about these digital nomads thinking they're above the real world. It didn't bother me. Not anymore. I'd stopped needing validation from people who confused property deeds with personal growth. But I also hadn't forgotten. Or forgiven. Because beneath all Ron's condescension and performative alpha behavior, there was something fragile, insecure, the kind of man who needed to feel above others to feel stable. I wasn't interested in tearing him down, but I was interested in making sure he never used me as his public punching bag again. So I spent the weeks leading up to Easter preparing. Quietly. Intentionally. I'd taken everything I'd collected about Ron's real estate dealings, the LLCs, the court filings, the housing violations, and compiled it into a tidy PDF. The document was professionally formatted, clear, sourced, and footnoted. No wild accusations, no dramatic headlines, just facts. A clear, objective outline of a man who claimed to be a real estate genius, but operated like a slumlord in 3 different zip codes. I didn't print it. I didn't post it online. I submitted it, anonymously, to 3 places. The County Housing Authority, citing multiple tenant complaints that had been ignored. A local investigative journalist, who ran a weekly column on property abuse and landlord misconduct. A real estate investor forum where Ron frequently bragged about his passive income strategy under a username that was, hilariously, just his initials and birth year. Then I waited. I didn't attend Easter. I told my mom I had a conflict and promised to call her the next day. I knew better than to walk into the blast zone. Because the fallout was coming. And it came faster than I expected. 4 days later, the local news website ran a piece titled, "Behind the Suburban Facade, the Landlords Neglecting Their Tenants." Ron wasn't the headline, but he was in the second paragraph. Name, company, citations, complaints. One tenant had spoken on record about a leaking ceiling that had been fixed with duct tape and a tarp. Another mentioned threats of eviction after asking for working heat. The article didn't outright accuse him of illegal activity, but it raised enough eyebrows, enough doubt. The family group chat exploded. Aunt Beth was the first to message. "Can someone explain what's happening? Why is Ron in the news?" Marissa sent a link. Silence followed. Then came Ron's first message in hours. "Don't believe everything you read." Hit piece journalism. Already talking to my lawyer. But the damage had been done. He'd built his identity on being untouchable, the self-made guru, the guy with the answers. Now, he looked like a fraud. Over the next few weeks, 2 of his tenants filed formal complaints with the city. One of his rental properties was inspected and fined. A real estate podcast he'd been invited to speak on quietly removed his episode. And on the investor forum, someone posted a thread comparing Ron's online advice to the violations listed in the article. The comments were brutal. I didn't gloat. I didn't so much as forward the article to anyone. But the next time Marissa and I met for coffee, she leaned across the table and whispered, "That wasn't just karma, was it?" I smiled. "Karma's lazy. That was accountability." She blinked, then laughed. "You're terrifying now. Just prepared." Ron didn't speak to me for 3 months. Not a word. Not an email. Not a passive-aggressive meme. The silence was glorious. And then, out of nowhere, he called. It was a Tuesday morning. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I picked up. "Caleb," he said, voice stiff. "I want to talk." "About?" He hesitated. "About what's happened." I leaned back in my chair. "Sure. Talk. I just want to clear the air," he said. "Look, I may have said some things over the years. Maybe I pushed too hard. I'm old school. I believe in structure. Property. That kind of thing. You know how I am." "Yeah," I said, "I do. I didn't mean to make you feel like less." "But you did." Silence. Then, quietly, "I know." I waited. Let the moment sit. "I guess I didn't realize how far it had gone," he continued. "I thought we were just ribbing each other. But you were never really laughing, were you?" "No." He sighed. "Well, I hope things are going well for you." "They are. I mean that. And I hope maybe we can reset. Start fresh." I considered that. Because I wasn't interested in revenge just for the thrill. I didn't need him humiliated, broken, ruined. I just wanted him to stop. To stop using me as a stepping stool. To stop treating me like a failed version of himself. To stop pretending like his way was the only way. So I said, "I'm open to that. But on one condition." "What's that?" "No more advice. No more pamphlets. No more passive-aggressive comments about equity or renting or adulthood. If I ask for your opinion, give it. Otherwise, assume I'm doing just fine." He hesitated. "Okay. Deal." We ended the call civilly. Not warmly, but peacefully. And that was enough. The next family event I attended was 4th of July. Full circle. Ron was there, quieter. Not sullen, just subdued. More polite. He asked about my business, but didn't press. He didn't bring pamphlets. Didn't raise his voice. When I told a story, he let me finish it. It was the smallest thing, but it felt like everything. Later that night, as the fireworks lit up the sky and cousins chased sparklers through the yard, my dad came over and sat beside me. "You handled it well," he said softly. "Better than I would have." I looked at him. "Handled what?" He smiled. "Exactly." We watched the sparks in silence. And I realized, this wasn't about winning. It was about no longer needing to fight. Ron had finally stopped looking down on me. Because I'd stopped letting him. And in that peace, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not from a mortgage. Not from family expectations. But from the version of myself that used to shrink in the face of people like him. That version was gone. And all that remained was this. I didn't need to own a house to own the room. I'd built something stronger than equity. I'd built a life I didn't need to justify.